Good to see you guys. Welcome to the truth about relational conflict, also known as it's not you, it's. Come on, fam. You guys know this one. It's not you, it's me. Somebody said it's her. Ah, man, that's amazing. Hey, do me a favor, those of you who are watching online. I know that's like longer than usually we stick to the emojis, but type in the comments, it's not you, it's me. Those of you who are in the room, I want you to look at the person closest to you in the most socially distant, safe way possible. I want you to say to them, it's not you, it's me. Okay, one more time, but this time, like you mean it, say it with your chest. Those of you who are online, type it in all caps. Come on now, you married people are looking at each other like, I'm not sure if I want to make that commitment right now. I want you to give it one more try. It's not you, it's me. Awesome. John chapter 4. You're not going to be laughing in about 20 minutes, I promise you. John chapter 4 is our anchor text that we're going to be looking at today. It's an amazing passage. Before we get started, I want to give you a little bit of a context. The book of John was written by a guy who was convinced that his brother was the Son of God. Now, here's why that is so important. James, the person who writes the book that we're going to be looking at today, he's going to identify a lie that a lot of us believe about relational conflict. Okay, so when you think of conflict, with your spouse or your roommate, with your parents, your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers, your boss, just any category in life, he's going to identify a lie that most of us believe. And then James, or Jim, as his high school friends love to call him back in the day, is going to replace that lie with a truth that is so far out there and it is so offensive that if you are anything like me, you will get defensive. Okay, I'm just throwing that out there just so you are prepared. And when that happens, okay, as we read the scripture today, when you get to that place where you find yourself getting defensive and you find yourself having arguments in your head with James, like, well, that sounds great, but James doesn't know my story and he doesn't know my situation and he's never met my roommate, he's never met my spouse, he was not there. When you find yourself trying to look for reasons why you are the exception, I just want you to remember that the words that we're about to read were written by a guy who grew up with a perfect brother. Okay? Or to put it a different way, these words were written by a guy who sat in the back of the wagon on the way to Disney World and he did this to Jesus. I'm not touching you. Anybody remember? I'm not touching you. This is the guy that was sitting back there with Jesus the whole way. Listen to what James has to say about relational conflict. James chapter 4, verse 1. What causes, he says, fights and quarrels among you? Pause before we keep reading and see if you can go back to the last fight that you had, or quarrel, or disagreement with anybody. Okay, don't worry, I'm not going to make you stay there for too long, but for just a few seconds, I want everybody in the room and everybody who's watching to see if you can mentally go back to the scene of the last argument, fight, disagreement that you were in. For some of you, you got to dig a while. For some of you, it happened before you walked in the door, and we know how that works. You walk in, you're like, hey, everybody, but it was World War II in the car on the way here. But let me know when you're there, okay? I got a question for you. Just give me a little show of hands if you can go back to the last scene of argument, quarrel, disagreement that you have. Give me a hand emoji in the comments so I know we're there. Anybody? Okay, Joe, I'm waiting for you. Anybody? You guys never fought? You haven't fought in a while? Okay, you're not incriminating yourself is what he says. I'll take that. I will accept that. Everybody is there. Question for you. What caused that? Right? Just think about that for a second. What caused the last fight, argument, quarrel that you were in? Again, doesn't have to be spouse, could be roommate, coworker, neighbor. What, in your opinion, was the root cause of the last fight and argument that you we're in? That's the question that James is asking you in James chapter 4. James wants you to know, or he wants to know rather, if you know what the root cause of the last fight that you were in was. What causes, he says in verse 1, fights and quarrels among you. Are you ready for this? He says, don't they come, he says, from desires that battle within you? Oh, the audacity of James, the brother of Jesus, to suggest, are you with me? This is going to be spicy, I promise you guys, that the last fight you're in had nothing to do with the person really on the other side of your argument? Can I pick on you a little bit? Is that okay? I can't tell if you're saying yes behind the mask or not, so I'm just going to assume that you are saying yes, okay? So I'm just going to pick on you. Can you help me preach for a little bit? You look nervous. Okay. Not you, Chris. I'm talking to them back there. You look nervous. Are you good? You good? I promise whatever happens in the room stays in the room and on the stream. So, and whoever watches it on YouTube later during the week on demand, and so we won't tell anybody else. But a second ago, I said, see if you can go back to the last fight or argument you were in, right? Who was it with? Who was it with? Is that guy? There you go. All right. Did you know that she was going to pick you? Okay. He's like, oh, yeah. Okay. How long was this, like, on the way here? Like, was that? Okay, good. I was just testing my prophetic word. When was it? How long ago? Last night. Okay, so it's nice and fresh. Okay. So, you want to tell us? Do you want to tell us what the fight? I'm just kidding. You don't have to. You want to tell us? I was just saying that. But if we want to have a full-blown counseling session here, I'm totally cool with it. How long have you guys been married, by the way? 6 months. Okay. All right. So you guys got it all figured out. You're ready to write a book, host some seminars, have a conference on marriage, and make it happen. You look more nervous than she is. I'm not really sure what that tells me. That makes me feel like maybe you were the culprit. Listen to what James said. Maybe. I'm just guessing, okay? Most of the time, it's the guy, okay? Amen? I remember, this has nothing to do with the sermon, but just to throw the guys a little bit. I remember when my wife and I first got married, and we would fight and argue all the time. And I remember telling my wife, I'm like, look, just statistically speaking alone, right, it's not possible for me to be wrong that many times. Anybody know what I'm talking about? I'm like, I have to bat 1 out of 100. Like, at least just give me 1. But here's what James is saying. Right? He says in James chapter 4, verse 1, he says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? So James, let's imagine, could somehow see whatever fight you guys were fighting about last night. What James is saying to you, Bree, is that just so you know, last night's fight really at the end of the day had very little to do with him. Right, but James is proposing and suggesting. I told you, this is offensive. Don't be mad at me. This is what James said, okay? You look happier now, by the way. You're like, thank you. Joe, don't you wish I would have picked you now? Now you wish you were the one. But seriously, what James is saying is that really the real reason, i.e. the root cause of whatever, and I don't know what the fight or argument was that you guys had last night, but what he's saying and what he's going to argue in this chapter is that what happened had far more to do with what's going on inside of you than anything he said or didn't say or do or didn't do. Now, I don't know how that makes you feel, but every time I read this verse, I get defensive. Right? Anybody with me? Like anytime I read it, anytime I read this idea where James is saying, hey, I just want you to know that the root cause of your argument is a battle that's going on inside of you. I get defensive for 2 reasons. Number 1, he wasn't there, right? I'm like, he's assuming a lot about a situation that he doesn't know a lot about. He wasn't there last night when you guys were arguing. So how can he say it's more about you than it has to do with him inside of you? The other reason I have a hard time with and I get defensive is because I believe, like many of you, that the evidence suggests otherwise, right? And I know that not just because I was at the scene of the fight. I wasn't at the scene of your fight. I'm talking now about my wife and I. I know that because not only was I there at the scene of all the last quarrels and fights and arguments I have, I know that because a lot of times I will go back to the scene of a fight to collect evidence that I missed before. Does anybody else do this? Please let me know that I'm not the only one. You're laughing. I imagine you know what it's like. Anybody else go back to a fight in your head over and over to collect evidence? Kristen says, anybody know what I'm talking about? Right? You're like, I need to just collect as much evidence as possible. I do that a lot. And 99.9% of the time, the evidence overwhelmingly suggests that the reason that the fight, the quarrel happened is because of something the person on the other side said. And what James is proposing here today, thank you guys. Can we give him a hand, by the way, for letting me pick on you for a little bit? What James is proposing here, don't miss this, is that when we find ourselves, again, this is not really honestly about marriage. This is just about life and conflict as a whole. That when you find yourself in a disagreement, an argument, and a quarrel, that what is happening has far more to do with what's inside of you than anything the person on the other end did. I think if most of us are honest, we are convinced that the reason that we're mad and the reason we're frustrated and the reason we're angry and the reason we're sad is because of something the other person on the other side of the fight did. Because after all, come on now, If they wouldn't have done that, they wouldn't be mad, right? If they would have listened and if they would have said the right thing or not said the right thing, they would have been more kind or compassionate or more patient or whatever it is that you have in your mind. Most of us are convinced that if the other person would have just acted just a little bit differently, then we wouldn't be in this fight. And James is going to throw a challenge flag on that play. You know how in sports the coach would throw a flag and be like, I want you to see a replay of it because something happened that you missed? That's what James is about to show us in here. Check this out. I'm going to read it again, and we're going to just camp around this first verse for a while because it's absolutely incredible. James chapter 1, verse 4. We're going to start there again. What causes, James says, fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from desires, the battle inside of you? And just in case you didn't catch it the first time, he's going to double down on the same idea again. He says, you desire, but you don't have. You kill, you covet, but you cannot get what you want. So you quarrel and you fight. James is saying the root cause and the reason you and I get in fights and quarrels is because we have desires inside of us that are in a battle within us. Now, don't miss the point, okay? James is not saying the person on the other side did not play a part in it, right? James is not saying, are you with me, that they didn't provoke you, right? What causes fights and quarrels among you, don't they come, he says, from desires, the battle within you? What James is proposing to you and I is that the root cause of the frustration and the anger and the angst that you and I have when we're in relational conflict with other people has far more to do with what's going on inside of us than what's going on outside of us. What James is proposing in James chapter 4 is that all of the he said and she said and he did and he didn't and if he would and if they would have, all of that James is saying is peripheral to what is going on the inside. What James is saying to you and I is that when we get mad and we get frustrated and we are angry and we are worked up and we are sad or whatever emotion we feel because of something someone did, i.e., when we get shook by other people, what comes out of us, right? Woo! When we get shook and all of those things come out of us, it is far more about what's inside of us than what was outside of us that caused the thing inside of us to come out. What James is saying is that when people provoke us, if you want to use that word, and we get in this argument and we get in those fights, all they are doing is exposing what's already inside of us. That's what James is trying to get you to see. He's trying to get you to just take a step back for a second at that argument, that fight, that quarrel, and you're going, no, it was the other person. It's what they said. It's what they did. It's how they provoked me. And James is saying that might be true, but you need to just go back and watch the replay, and you will see that all that person really did at the end of the day, most of the time, is they exposed what was already inside of us. Listen to how he says it. Again, anybody want a Coke? Let me know, and I'll bring it over to where you're sitting. He says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from desires, the battle within you? You desire, but you do not have. You kill, you covet, but you can't get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. Listen to how Eugene Peterson is a pastor that paraphrased the Bible to make it a little bit easier to read. And normally, I love Eugene Peterson and the message paraphrase because he brings the message to life. This time, I don't like it because it hits a little bit too close to home. Listen to how he put it. This is incredible. He says, where do you think all these appalling wars and quarrels come from? Do you think they just happen? He says, think again. They come, are you ready for this? This is amazing, okay? This will change, I'm telling you, the narrative of every relational conflict that you are in if you will let this hit home. Listen to what he says. He says, they come about because you want your own way and you fight for it deep inside yourselves. You lust for what you do not have, and you are willing to kill to get it. In other words, you want something. There's a desire inside of you, and you and I will do anything we can to meet that desire. You want what isn't yours, and you will risk violence to get your hand on it. There's a phrase, when I read this, I couldn't stop thinking about it. He says, you want your own way, and you fight deep inside yourselves. 4 weeks ago, I was preparing this message. I looked at James 4, and I'm like, let me see what the Message paraphrase says. I looked at it, I'm like, I should not have done that. Right? And this is not, I'm not exaggerating. I closed my Bible, and I'm like, I'm done with prep for today. I'm going home. I get in my car. I promise you this is a true story. I drive home, kids and everything crazy. Within 30 minutes of being home, my wife and I get in a fight. Right? I mean, don't you love it when God sets you up like that? How many of you know that God will set you up to get your attention? Anybody know what I'm talking about? 2 people in the room. Please let me know in the comments if you, I mean, some people call it coincidence. Some people call it serendipity. I call it divine setup. God will set you up, I promise you, to get your attention. I mean, I literally just read this. I go home. I don't even remember what it is. I just remember my wife and I are in the kitchen, and we're having, the marital thing, and we're going back and forth, and we're arguing about something. And she said this, okay? And this is how I knew. I looked, I was like, okay, God, I get it. She literally said in the middle of our argument, she said, you know what? You just want your own way. And it took everything in me not to bust out laughing, okay? I wanted to, but if you're married, you know how that works. You can't show weakness in an argument, okay? You show a moment of weakness, your spouse is going to pounce on that thing and take you down. But on the inside, I almost started laughing because I could not believe that she literally quoted verbatim the verse I just read, right? They come about, the writer says, because you want your way and you fight for it deep inside of you. I know this sounds overly simplistic, but what if it's true? Okay, what if it's true? What if the root cause, what if the real reason why most of us get in fights and quarrels and disagreements is because we want our way and we're not getting it? Right? What if the real reason we get so worked up when we have relational conflict is because we want something and we're not getting that something? Now, what if that's what it boils down to at the end of the day? We want something and we're not getting it. We want respect and we're not getting respect. We want to be appreciated and we're not getting appreciation. We want to be recognized. We want to be understood. Right? I mean, you fill in the blanks. I think at the end of the day, if you will, I promise you, if you will go back to the last fight or quarrel or disagreement that you had with anybody and you dig deep, you will find an unmet desire. The bottom line is, for most of us, 99.9% of the time, when we find ourselves in relational conflict, it's because we want something and we are not getting it, says the writer. You want your own way, he says, and you fight for it deep inside of you. What if it's true? What if, you guys, this is the real root cause of 99.99% of our relational conflict, is that we want something and we are not getting it. Or as Eugene Peterson puts it, we want our way and we're not getting our way. And here comes the plot twist that you didn't see coming. You know how you didn't know when you saw Usual Suspects that Kevin Spacey was Kaiser Sose until the very end? Or Sixth Sense, you didn't know he was dead the whole time, right? Unless you haven't seen the movie, like Craig is like, dang it, now you'll know because I just ruined it for you. But for those of us who have seen it, you know how you watch those movies and you didn't even know that was coming? This is the plot twist that maybe you didn't see coming. And when I saw this, I'm telling you, man, I didn't know if I should laugh or cry or just crawl in the corner in my office. Here's what's crazy about what James is saying here. James is saying, at the end of the day, the reason you're in conflict is because you want something and you're not getting it, and you want your way and you're not getting your way. Here is the craziest part about it. What James is saying is true even when you're right. Okay, think about that for a second. I don't know what your last fight or argument was, but let's just assume, Brady, that you were 100% right and he's 100% in the wrong. What James is saying here still applies. James is saying, hey, just so you know, even when you are 100% right and you are justified, at the end of the day, it's still the same principle. You want something and you're not getting it. You are not getting your way. You want to be right and you want the person on the other side to know that you are right. Bottom line is you're still not getting your way, even when you're right. Parents, can I give you an example that's going to drive you crazy? And if your kids are really smart and paying attention, they may use it against you, so you might want to cover their ears. Jerusha is like, don't tell them, sorry. I know, I'm about to ruin it for you if your kids pay close attention. Are you ready? When your kids misbehave, okay, go back to the last time your kids did something that you didn't want them to do. When your kids misbehave, didn't do their chores, didn't listen to you, didn't follow instructions, went to a place, took a thing you told them not to take. Even in that situation, when you get mad and frustrated and you're worked up, rightly so, what James is saying here still applies. The reason you're frustrated or mad or whatever it is with your kids, even when you're in the right, is because you want something and you're not getting it. Now, hopefully someday they're going to grow up and realize that, wow, what daddy and mommy wanted for me is what's best for me, and they're going to see it the way you see it, and then guess what? You're going to get your way, and when you get your way, it's going to be the happiest they ever as a parent because finally they see what you see. But until then, there will be many situations where your kids just aren't going to see what you see, and until then, you're not going to get your way. And because you're not going to get your way, there's going to be relational tension. And I'm not saying that you're wrong or that you should give in to your kids. I'm just helping you identify that even when it comes to parenting, what James is saying here is true. At the end of the day, most of the time, the reason we have relational conflict, even with our kids, is because we're not getting our way. What causes fights and quarrels among you, James says, don't they come from desires that what? Battle within you. The moral of the story, if you're not catching it, what James is saying here is that it doesn't matter how you slice it or how you try and justify you or how you try and dodge from it. At the end of the day, the reason most of us get worked up in the midst of conflict is because we are simply not getting our way. I heard someone teach on this, I don't know, a really, really long time ago, and he suggested something that I'm hesitant to suggest this morning, because anytime I suggest something on stage through camera when I'm preaching, then I'm accountable, and God will set me up, and my wife is also watching. And so I'm always like, do I want to say that? Because then now I got to do it. But can I make a suggestion? Imagine if in the midst of your next fight, maybe tonight, right? Maybe a week if you're lucky and well behaved. Imagine if in the midst of your next fight, you're going back and forth. Again, doesn't have to be marriage, coworker, friend, boss, wherever it is, neighbor. Imagine if in the midst of it, when they're going and you're going and you're going to, imagine if you call the timeout and you just said, you know what the problem is here? I'm just not getting my way. Just think about that. Okay, they're ready, you're ready. They've got their shots ready to go, and you've got yours, and they've got their argument, and they've got evidence from the last 3 fights and the 6 months ago and a year ago, and they're ready to fire, and you're ready to fire. Imagine if in the midst of that, you just call the timeout, even with your kids, and you say, hey, kids, just so you know what the problem is here? I'm just not getting my way. Show of hands if you think you can do that. If you have the humility and the courage to do that. Now you're accountable. You raise your hand, and she looked at you, and we all saw you, and it's on camera, so you better do that. But I'm going to just be real for just a few minutes here. I was preparing the sermon for the last 4 weeks, and I just felt like over and over again, God's like, here's a layup. And I'm sitting the other day, true story, I'm sitting in the kitchen with my wife, and we're arguing about something. I don't know what it is, right? And the whole time, I got this phrase the whole time. I felt like, God, okay, here's your chance. Like I had a window to just, hey, to call a time. I say, hey, babe, I just want you to know. You know what the problem is here? I'm just not getting, we can do this for the next 35 minutes, but let me just tell you right now, the problem right here is I'm not getting my way. I tried. I was like, the words could not come out. Right? You guys are like, and then you told her 5? No, I didn't say it. This is the first time she's hearing me say this phrase. I literally could not get the words out. Even though it's true. Because of my pride, and this is not really up on the screen, but James will say later, a couple of verses after this verse, that God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. God opposes the proud. Man, I just can't admit it, because if I admit it, then I'm admitting it. But James says, but God gives grace to the humble. So Sammy, are you willing to be humble? Are you willing to be the one in the midst of relational conflict to do what I didn't have the strength to do, to call a timeout and just say, hey, I just want you to know that the problem here is I'm just not having my way. I know it sounds crazy, but come on now. Imagine if this was our posture. Imagine if we did this. Imagine if you took that initiative when you had your next relational conflict. Right? Imagine if the next time you and your roommate are kind of going back and forth, or your neighbor or coworker or your spouse or even your kids. Imagine what would happen if in the midst of that you call the timeout and you say, hey, I know this is crazy and all that. I just want you know what the problem is here? You know what the problem is here? I'm just not getting my way. It is so hard to come to that place, and maybe that's why James says a few verses later, God opposes the proud, but if you are humble, God will give you grace. You guys mind if we practice that? Because it's a lot easier here than when you're actually like there, you know? You know what the problem is here? Come on, say it with me. Type it online if you're watching. Let's say it together. You know what the problem is here? I'm just not getting my way. Okay, so I'm going to say it, and then you guys are going to say it. This is like, you're a teacher, Kristen. What am I missing here? Help me here. I'm going to say it, and you're going to say what I say, and I'm going to say the second part, and you're going to say the second part. Okay, ready? Let's try it again. You know what the problem is here? I'm just not getting my way. We're going to do it one more time, but this time with a little bit of attitude like you're actually in a fight, okay? Because you're saying it with a smile on your face. I promise you're not going to have a smile on your face when you got to apply it. You know what the problem is here? I'm just not getting my way. You guys are looking at each other laughing. This is going to be great material for later. I wish we could have cameras just follow everybody around for the next week. And when you guys have those moments, let's see who does it or not. What causes fights and quarrels among you, James says? Don't they come from desires that battle within you? You desire, but you don't have, so you kill. You covet because you can't get what you want. You quarrel and you fight. And then James says this, and this is kind of where we're going to land the plane. James takes us to a place that I wasn't expecting when I read this. He says, you do not have because you do not ask God. Boom. You do not have, he says, because you don't ask God. Not sure if you see it or not, but what James is doing here, don't miss this. This is amazing. James is connecting the dots from our relational conflict, what's happening outside, to what's happening inside. And then he connects the dot from what's happening inside of you back to the only one who can do something about what's happening inside of you. Are you guys catching this? He's saying the reason you get in fights all of the time is because you've got a battle going on inside of you. And then he says the reason that you're not getting what you want is because you're not asking God. What James is proposing here is not that what you want is bad. James is not saying that your desires are bad, or your desire to be respected or to be loved or to be understood or to be appreciated or for your kids to just clean their room. James is not saying those are bad desires. James says that most of the time we are asking people who can't meet those desires to meet those desires. James is saying the problem is that we will ask anybody but the one person who can actually meet our desires to meet our desires. James is saying here, the problem is that we are trying to wring out of people what people could never give us, and we're asking things for people that people could never deliver on. We are putting expectations on each other that people could never meet. And James is connecting us back to God. I want to read it again. I know we've read that verse like a million times now, but listen to what he says. He says, you desire, verse 2, but do not have. So you kill, you covet, and you cannot get what you want. So you quarrel, right? And you fight. You will do whatever you can, he's saying, to get what you want. Now listen to what he says on here. He says, you do not have. Why? Because you do not ask God. And when you ask, you don't receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. You don't have because you don't ask God. Isn't that interesting? We'll ask our friends. We'll ask our coworkers. We'll ask our neighbors. We'll ask our pastors. We'll ask our spouse. We'll ask our best friends to meet our desire. The battles inside of us. I just want someone to understand me. I want someone to appreciate everything I do. I want someone to see me. I want somebody to respect me. We have all of these battles, all of these needs inside of us. And James is saying the reason that we have conflict is because we keep pouring those desires on other people. And the invitation that James is giving you and I today is to bring those desires to God. What James is asking us to do today is to look inside and look up instead of looking outside and around us. That's what most of us do. We look outside to the other person and we look around us for solutions. And James is inviting us to look inside. He's inviting us to say, hey, what is the battle that's going on inside of you? And then what does it look like for you to bring that to God? And so go back again, if you will, to the scene of the last fight, argument, quarrel that you went to. But this time, don't go back to collect evidence. This time, I want you to go back and I want you to see if you can identify what desire was battling inside of you. I'm telling you guys, every fight, every quarrel, every disagreement, if you pay close attention, you will find that there is an unmet desire. Let me give you a silly example. The other day, I walked into my kids' room, Eden and Nora sharing a room, and it was a mess. And I just got so frustrated because I just told them to clean their room. Any parents know what I'm talking about here? Like, anybody want to just like quit and just be like, what's the point? Right? I was so frustrated. And so I'm like, just pick up your stuff and clean your room and make your bed and clothes everywhere and just going through the whole speech and all of that stuff. And as I'm doing that, again, I've been working on this sermon. I felt like God in that moment said to me, okay, Sammy, this is a good example right here of James chapter 4. So what does it look like for you to apply James chapter 4 in this context? And you may laugh at me, but this is what I did. I literally went to God after I was mad and frustrated. And I said to God in prayer, I'm like, I am mad and I am frustrated that my kids will not clean their room and I am not getting my way. And it makes me mad because I want my way. And my way is that they would just clean their room. So can you please do whatever it is you can do, send some angels or something so that they can clean their room. You know what I realized as I was praying to God? I realized that the reason I was so worked up about the room being dirty is because I wanted it to be clean. The reason I wanted it to be clean is because I just want to be able to control something. Because that's what I do when I feel like life's out of control. I just clean. Because if I can, I don't know if anyone else like this, I'm like, if I can just keep my space clean, then it makes me feel better. Anybody wired like that? I'm like, can I just have a clean car, a clean office, a clean corner, a closet, just something? Can we just, and that's what it was. And I didn't realize this. I'm mad and I'm frustrated. My kids aren't cleaning the room. And I'm telling God, and all of a sudden, I realized that really it's not about the room. It's not about their bed or making their bed. No. It's about a desire that's battling inside of me. And it's because I want control. And the reason I want control is because I'm scared And so I go from praying about my kids not cleaning their room, and God and I are now talking about my control issues and my fear. And I'm saying, God, okay, maybe instead of looking at my kids to meet a desire they could never meet, how about I come to you and tell you I'm struggling right now. I got to just clean something so I feel like I'm in control. Because I'm scared. I feel like everything around me is just spinning around. I need something to hold on to. You don't have because you don't ask God. James is inviting you and I to step aside from all the he said and she said and all the evidence that we've gathered together. And he's saying, would you go to God? So what if instead of just going at it, you go to God and you identify the desire and say, God, I just feel lonely right now. Right? I mean, I'm in a marriage, but I feel lonely in my marriage. And instead of trying to wring that out of maybe my spouse, God, I'm gonna come to you and tell you the desire that's really battling inside of me. God, I just need some self-worth right now. I'm not feeling great about myself, and I could blame everybody else for not saying what they're supposed to say and make me feel a certain way. But I'm gonna come to you with that desire. God, I just want to be respected more than anything else. I just want to feel loved. I just want to be understood. I just need you to let me know that I'm enough, God. I just need somebody to do something with my past. James said most of the time when we fight, it's because we have desires inside of us, and he's inviting you and I to take those desires to God. So practically, if I could put this in closing in context of what we've been saying for the last 6 weeks, we got to change our lives. We got to change the way we think. We got to change the way we think. We got to recognize the lies that we believe, replace them with truth, and we got to repeat the process over and over and over again. I think the lie that most of us believe with relational conflict is that it's about the other person, and James is replacing that lie with a truth today that most of the conflict we experience is a direct result of battles that are going on inside of us. And James is saying, will you bring those desires to God? Practically speaking, call a timeout. Recognize that the problem is that you're not getting your way, and then take those desires to God. Not sure how many of you guys caught it when we did the before service thing, but starting tomorrow, we're going to put a system in place to help you guys remember the truth, to help us remember the truths that we talk about on Sunday morning. And so we recorded these things called guided prayers. And tomorrow morning, we're going to release the first one. And here's what we're asking everybody to do. Like you guys remember I said this a month ago, that the most important part about changing our thought is not just recognizing the lie or replacing it. It's repeating the truth over and over and over and over again. And so starting tomorrow, we got a 5-minute guided prayer that we're going to, if you have our app, we're going to text to you. And we're asking you every day this week to just take 5 minutes and just remember what's true about what's inside of you, what's happening around you, and to accept the invitation from God to bring our desires to Him. What causes fights and quarrels among you, James says? Don't they come from desires that battle within you? Let me pray for us. We'll get out of here. Jesus, I just thank you so much for my friends. Thank you that your word is so practical and so applicable. We're all in the midst of this. We all need it. We need this truth. We all in relationships, and there's always conflict. And so I just pray, God, for 2 things. I pray for grace. Will you give us grace to be humble? Help us be humble in those situations where our emotions just well up, God. Will you allow us to humbly acknowledge, God, that the problem is that we're just not getting our way. Give me, God, the humility to be able to say that out loud. Give us the courage to be able to come to you, and the discernment to identify our desires and to be able to bring them to you. Help us do that, God, this week. And last but not least, I pray in the same way that you set me up, that you would set everybody in this room up and everybody who's watching, that sometime this week that we will all find ourselves in a situation where James 4 comes to life. When that moment comes, give us the discernment to see the desires battling in us, and give us the courage and the humility to be able to acknowledge it and come to you for help. We pray these things in Jesus' name. And everybody said,